What if the most caring person in the family is also the one who suffers the most in silence? Until one day, they simply disappear from it. And the shocking part is this: they do not leave because they stop loving. They leave because they can no longer survive what love has turned into. If you have ever felt emotionally drained in a place that is supposed to feel like home, or if you have ever questioned whether loving your family should cost you your peace, stay with this, because this is not just about family. It is about the mind under emotional pressure. The most loving person you will ever meet, the one who felt everything, who stayed the longest, who tried the hardest, is probably sitting alone somewhere right now, cut off from their family. And everyone around them believes they are the problem. But here is what nobody really explains. The empath did not walk away because they stopped caring. They walked away because caring for too long almost destroyed them. And by the time you reach the end of this, the way you see family separation will not feel the same anymore. If you have ever felt more drained after leaving a family gathering than before you entered it, or if you have ever sat in the car outside your childhood home and needed a moment just to prepare yourself before going in, this is for you. Stay with this. And if you want to reflect more deeply, ask yourself quietly, did your family ever call you too sensitive, and did they say it like it was something wrong with you? Keep listening, because this goes deeper than most people ever admit. You were called too sensitive for most of your life. Maybe it was your mother, maybe it was your father, a sibling, or an uncle at a holiday table who laughed when you got emotional over something others ignored. Too sensitive, like sensitivity was a flaw, like feeling deeply was something broken inside you that needed fixing. And slowly, without even noticing, you started to believe it. Not because it was true, but because it was repeated. You were young, and when you are young, you assume adults understand reality better than you do. So you took their judgment and stored it inside yourself as truth. You did not question it, because questioning it would mean questioning the people you depended on. And that is not how children survive emotionally. They adapt, they accept, even when what they are accepting slowly changes how they see themselves. But something important happened underneath all of that. The sensitivity did not disappear. It did not go away just because you were told to hide it. It moved inward. It became quieter on the surface. But inside, it stayed active. It kept observing. It kept reading people. It kept noticing shifts in tone, silence between words, changes in energy that others did not even register. While you were being told to be less emotional, your nervous system was becoming more alert. While you were being told to stop feeling so much, your brain was becoming more skilled at feeling everything in the room at once. And this is where the real understanding begins. Because what people often dismiss as too sensitive is not weakness. It is a heightened form of emotional perception that never really turns off. When we talk about empaths, we are not talking about something vague or imaginary. We are talking about a real pattern in how some nervous systems respond to the world. In simple terms, some people are more emotionally attuned than others. They do not just see expressions, they feel them. They do not just hear tone, they absorb it. Neuroscience discusses systems in the brain, such as mirror neuron activity, that help humans understand and reflect the emotions of others. In highly sensitive individuals, this process can feel more intense, almost like emotional echoing. When someone near them is in pain, they do not only recognize it logically, they internally react to it. When someone is anxious, they can begin to feel that anxiety without it being their own experience. This is not imagination. It is how certain nervous systems are wired to interpret social reality. Now imagine what happens when a nervous system like that grows up in an emotionally unstable environment. A home where feelings are not expressed clearly, or where anger, silence, stress, or sadness are constantly present but never explained. A child like that does not get the option to separate their emotions from others. They do not get taught boundaries for feelings. Instead, they learn through survival. They learn to scan the environment constantly. They learn to predict moods before they arrive. They learn to adjust themselves in real time so that tension does not escalate. And over time, they begin to carry emotional responsibility that was never theirs to begin with. It is like placing a sponge in water that is already full of impurities. The sponge does not choose what it absorbs. It simply absorbs because that is its nature. Now imagine that sponge as a child placed inside emotional conditions they did not create and cannot escape. They absorb frustration that was never directed at them, grief that was never spoken out loud, and stress that belongs to adults who never learned how to process it. And because children rarely question their environment, they assume what they are feeling is who they are. So the emotional weight of the entire system slowly becomes their internal world. Over time, people start noticing the impact, but they misunderstand it. They see exhaustion and call it overreacting. They see anxiety and call it sensitivity. They see emotional overwhelm and call it weakness. But what they are actually seeing is a nervous system that has been overexposed for too long without recovery. Sighs, the sponge is not broken. It is just saturated, and no one taught it how to release what it was never meant to carry in the first place. Inside families, roles are often formed without anyone consciously agreeing to them. There is usually someone who becomes the loud one, someone who becomes the successful one, someone who becomes invisible, and someone who becomes the emotional stabilizer. The empath often ends up in that last role. They become the one who senses tension before anyone speaks, the one who notices changes in tone, the one who tries to keep peace even when it costs them their own comfort. They apologize first just to reduce conflict. They adjust their behavior to prevent emotional reactions from others. They learn to read a room like a survival skill rather than a social one. On the surface, this creates someone who appears emotionally intelligent, caring, and highly aware of others. And that part is true. But underneath, something else is forming at the same time. A belief that their worth is connected to how well they manage other people's emotions. A belief that love is earned by self-sacrifice. A belief that their own emotional needs are less important than keeping everyone else stable. And this belief becomes deeply embedded because it is reinforced over and over again in the place where they grow up. Eventually, this creates a painful internal contradiction. On one side, they are deeply caring, intuitive, and emotionally aware. On the other side, they are constantly exhausted, overwhelmed, and disconnected from their own needs. They know everyone else very well, but they slowly lose touch with themselves. And when they finally reach a limit, when the emotional load becomes too heavy to carry, something breaks. Not because they stop loving their family, but because they finally reach the point where continuing to carry everything meant losing themselves completely. Exhales, you carry it into every relationship you will ever have. You find yourself again and again giving more than you receive, tolerating more than you should, staying longer than is wise, because some deep part of you has been trained to believe this is what love requires. Give everything. Ask for nothing. And if you do ask for something, you feel like you are being difficult. If you express a need, it feels like you are selfish. If you set a limit, it feels like you are being dramatic. And still, the empath keeps trying. They keep giving. They keep hoping that if they give enough, love enough, adjust enough, the pattern will change. That one day the family will finally notice, that they will finally say, "We see you, we understand you, we are sorry." But that moment either never comes or it comes after too long, when the damage is already deep and the person has already been shaped by years of emotional exhaustion. By then, they have given so much of themselves that they barely recognize who they are outside of that role. Let me be very honest with you here. Some of you feel something uncomfortable while reading this, maybe even defensive. Maybe you were thinking about your own family and starting to notice things you never wanted to see before. That reaction is normal. Stay with it. That discomfort is not an error in you, it is information. And here is something I want to say clearly. Loving someone does not mean you are required to be destroyed by them. I will say it again because for many people, this is a completely new idea. Loving someone does not mean you must allow yourself to be broken in the process. You can love a person deeply and still recognize that being close to them is harming your mental and emotional health. Both truths can exist at the same time. Love does not protect you from harm. Love is not a shield that makes damage disappear. And it does not require you to erase yourself in order to keep someone else comfortable. But for the empath, this becomes very difficult to accept because from early life, they were taught a different message. They were taught that love is measured by sacrifice, that the more you suffer, the more you care, that boundaries are selfish, that saying no is betrayal. So when they finally, after years of trying, reach a point where they step back or distance themselves from their family, the guilt that follows is overwhelming. It is not a small feeling. It is not simple regret. It is deep, physical, emotional guilt that feels like they have done something wrong at the core of their identity. It feels like betrayal. It feels like everything they were told about themselves, too sensitive, too emotional, too much, was true all along. But that guilt is not proof that they are wrong. That guilt is proof of how deeply the conditioning ran. There's something important to understand here called emotional contagion. It is a real psychological process where humans unconsciously absorb emotional states from the people around them. Everyone experiences it to some degree. You can sit next to someone anxious and feel your own body tighten. You can be around someone angry and feel your chest become heavy. You can be with someone calm and feel your nervous system settle. This happens automatically, but in highly sensitive people, this effect becomes much stronger. The emotional boundary between self and other becomes thinner. Their nervous system responds more intensely to emotional environments. Now imagine what happens when someone like that grows up in a family where emotions are not stable, where anger is frequent, where sadness is unspoken but always present, where stress is constant, where emotional reactions are unpredictable. That child does not learn where they end and others begin. Instead, they learn to survive by reading everything. They learn to anticipate moods before they appear. They learn to adjust themselves constantly to prevent conflict. And over time, they begin carrying emotions that are not theirs without realizing it. They think what they feel belongs to them, when in reality, much of it is absorbed from the environment around them. This is where confusion begins, because the empath feels overwhelmed but does not understand why. They feel anxious but cannot trace the source. They feel exhausted but cannot identify the cause. And because no one ever taught them emotional separation, they assume the problem is inside them. They assume they are broken. But they are not broken. They are overloaded. They are carrying emotional weight that was never meant to be held by one nervous system. In psychological research, there is a condition known as complex trauma or complex PTSD. It does not come from a single event. It develops slowly over time through repeated emotional experiences, especially in environments where escape is not possible. It often forms in childhood, inside family systems where emotional needs are ignored, dismissed, or punished. It does not always look dramatic on the outside. There may be no visible injury, but internally, it creates long-term patterns like chronic shame, emotional confusion, difficulty trusting one's own perceptions, and a deep sense of being fundamentally different or disconnected from others. These experiences are not signs of weakness. They are the result of long-term emotional adaptation in difficult environments. And this brings us to an important question. Why do empaths eventually detach from their families? The answer is not simple, but it is real. In many cases, it becomes a matter of survival. There reaches a point where continuing the relationship costs too much. The emotional exhaustion becomes constant. The loss of self becomes noticeable. The inner conflict becomes too heavy to carry. And at that point, the person is forced into a difficult decision. Stay and continue deteriorating internally, or step away and begin recovering. That is not drama. That is not selfishness. That is a survival response. And when that decision is made, families often react in predictable ways. Instead of reflecting, they may become angry. Instead of questioning their own patterns, they may blame the person who left. Because family systems rely on roles. And when the empath steps out of the role they were assigned, the system loses balance. And unstable systems usually look for someone to blame in order to restore emotional order. Another reason empaths detach is clarity. When you are inside a system, you cannot see it clearly. You are too close to it. You are part of it. The patterns feel normal because they are familiar. But distance changes perception. Even a small amount of space can reveal patterns that were invisible before. Repeated arguments, repeated emotional cycles. The same conflicts happening again and again in different forms. And suddenly, what once felt random starts to look structured, predictable, mechanical. You begin to see that the narrative you were given about yourself was not an objective truth, but a story shaped by the system to maintain balance. This kind of clarity is not comfortable. It can feel painful, because seeing clearly often means realizing you were carrying emotional responsibilities that were never yours. It means realizing you were adapting to systems that were not designed for your well-being. And it also means beginning the process of grieving what you did not receive. The emotional safety, the understanding, the care you should have had but did not. There is also another reason for detachment, and it is often overlooked: identity. Many empaths spend so much of their life in a caregiving role that they begin to lose track of who they are outside of it. Their identity becomes connected to being useful, being helpful, being the one who keeps things stable. But when they step away from that environment, the question appears very clearly: who am I without this role? What do I want when I am not reacting to someone else's needs? These questions can feel frightening because they remove the structure that once defined their place in the world. And yet, this is also where something important begins, because distance creates space, and space allows identity to slowly rebuild itself. Not the identity shaped by expectation, but the one that exists underneath it. Even with all of this, one thing remains very important. The empath does not stop loving their family when they step away. That love does not disappear. It becomes more complex. It becomes mixed with grief, relief, confusion, and sadness all at the same time. And that emotional complexity is often misunderstood by others who assume that separation means absence of care. But in reality, many empaths leave precisely because they care too much to keep participating in something that is harming them. This is where guilt becomes especially strong, because the empath has been taught that love equals staying, love equals sacrifice, love equals endurance. So when they leave, even for valid reasons, it feels like a violation of something deeply ingrained. But guilt is not always a reliable indicator of wrongdoing. Sometimes guilt is just the echo of old conditioning, a system inside the mind that has not yet adjusted to a new reality. And here is something that needs to be said clearly, but psychologically, in the ongoing daily erosion of your sense of self, in the accumulation year after year of experiences that told you that your feelings do not matter, your needs are a burden, and who you are is wrong, that is damage. It is real damage. And pretending otherwise just because it does not look like other forms of damage is a mistake, a serious one. The empath who detaches from a family like that is not abandoning anyone. They are not betraying anyone. They are not choosing themselves over love. They are choosing to stay alive, psychologically, emotionally, in every sense that truly matters. I want to address something that often comes up in these discussions: family loyalty. The argument usually goes like this: family is sacred. Blood is thicker than water. You do not abandon family no matter what. You work through it. You forgive. You keep showing up. And I understand where that belief comes from. The desire to protect family bonds, to maintain connection through hardship, to forgive and remain. That instinct is not meaningless. It comes from something real in human nature, from the need for belonging and shared history. But what this argument often fails to recognize is this: it assumes the relationship is equal. It assumes loyalty is demanded from both sides in the same way, that both the empath and the other family members are held to the same level of effort, honesty, and willingness to change, that the emotional burden of maintaining the relationship is shared. In the families we are talking about, that is rarely the case. The loyalty demand is almost always placed on the empath. Stay, forgive, keep showing up, take whatever is given to you and still smile. Do not speak about what happens inside the family. Do not hold anyone accountable. Do not set limits. Do not ask for more than what is offered. And when the empath, finally exhausted, depleted, and barely recognizing themselves, says, "I cannot do this anymore," suddenly the language of loyalty appears. Suddenly it becomes about abandonment. Suddenly the one who gave everything is treated as the one who gave nothing. It is a strange reversal. And empaths, because they feel so deeply and are so sensitive to guilt, often fall into it. They hear you are abandoning your family and feel it as truth, because for them, feelings feel like truth. And so they return, and the cycle continues. Here is a question worth sitting with. What is the empath actually seeking when they detach? I do not believe they are seeking punishment. I do not believe they are seeking revenge. In most cases, they are not trying to hurt anyone. What they are really seeking, what they have always been seeking since childhood, is to be known, truly known, not as a role, not as a function, not as the family peacemaker or problem child or emotional caretaker, but as a full human being, complex, contradictory, feeling, wanting, needing. They want someone in their family to say, "I see you," not the version of you that is useful to me, not the version that makes me comfortable, but you, and I care about you simply because you exist. So if there is one truth to take from all of this, it is simple. Not every bond that looks like love actually feels like safety, and not every connection that demands your loyalty deserves your self-erasure. The empath does not leave because they stop caring. They leave because they finally start caring about themselves in a way they were never taught to. They stop measuring love by how much they can endure and start understanding that real love does not require constant suffering. And yes, there is guilt, there is grief, there is confusion, because stepping away from a system you were emotionally trained to survive in will always feel unnatural at first. But discomfort is not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it is a sign that something is finally changing. Over time, something shifts. The noise gets quieter. The emotional weight becomes lighter. And slowly, the person who spent years managing everyone else's feelings starts learning how to recognize their own again. You do not become cold. You do not stop loving. You simply stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. And that is where healing begins.